It was a swift move by the government.
It certainly was, Kirsten. John Dawkins was only elected as the President of the Upper House yesterday, and he's already been expelled from the parliamentary party. Last night, his colleagues had a joint party room meeting where they voted to expel him. They gave him 24 hours to respond and appeal the decision, but he decided not to do that. So, yes, he's been expelled from the party after being a member for more than 30 years and a Liberal MP in the Parliament for that same amount of time.
And what has been John Dawkins' reaction?
Well, he has said, you have expelled me from the parliamentary party, but I didn't really want to be in it anymore anyway. I've now been appointed to the role of President in the Upper House, and it would have been inappropriate for me to attend those parliamentary joint party room meetings as the President. So he says he didn't really want to attend anyway, but he has questioned the decision by his former party, I guess, saying that this has been done many times in the history of the South Australian Liberal Party, 3 times in the past 30 years since he's been in the Parliament that he can remember. So he was pretty confused about why this decision has been made, but at the end of the day, he does respect it and he will abide by it.
Now, a new Lower House Speaker was appointed yesterday. How has his first day been?
That's right, Josh Teague appointed in the role of Speaker in the Lower House. That was another controversial vote. And he's had a pretty rough first day as well, Kirsten. Yesterday, one of his first tasks as Speaker of the Lower House was to put forward a pretty sternly worded statement about the opposition leader and an ICAC investigation that's taking place here in South Australia into the expenses scandal. A number of MPs allegedly misusing the country members' accommodation allowance, and today he's shut down a lot of questions from the opposition in question time. They've hit back at that and said he's not fit to be in the Speaker's chair. They've put forward a motion to get him thrown out, but they don't have the numbers on the floor, so that's failed. But it's been definitely a fiery day in South Australia's Parliament.
All right, Stacey Lee, thank you. There's been a jump in coronavirus infections in Victoria overnight, with 76 new cases and a further 11 deaths reported. Stephanie Ferrier is in Melbourne.
Well, the number of new cases has been climbing for the past 3 days, with 76 our new case number for today. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, says it's important to note that the downward trajectory is continuing. He has pointed to the rolling 14-day average, which is now 74.5 across metropolitan Melbourne and 5 in regional Victoria, which means that we are now at an 80.8 14-day average across Victoria. Of course, everybody's watching that carefully because we have to reach that 50 or fewer new cases in order to be able to move further from these extended lockdowns that are due to expire on the 28th of September. We still sadly have another 11 deaths. They were 7 women and 4 men aged from their 60s to their 90s. 9 of those 11 deaths were connected to aged care. It's also important to note that those 76 new cases come off the back of increased testing numbers, more than 16,500. And we also have reducing active cases across Victoria. We now have just over 1,600 active cases and 82 active cases only in regional Victoria. So the Premier says that they are on the cusp of potentially being able to move out of some of these restrictions. We've also had a decrease of 7 in the number of mystery cases as well, which is good news for Victoria. There has been quite a lot of disquiet about the contact tracing system here in Victoria, but the Premier says that we are now close to being able to get up to 100% of close contacts notified within that 48-hour time frame for people who do test positive for coronavirus. And he also says that he believes that this should not make people less likely to remain compliant to the roadmap.
If anger and frustration were like a vaccine against this virus, then we'd all be in a much better position. And I just say to people, the notion that I have chosen this way to go and there were 50 other options I could have chosen, that's not in any way accurate. We'd all like to be open tomorrow, myself included. But to do that is not an act of leadership. That is to cave to some of the pressure that's there, to be driven by the anger instead of the epidemiology, to be driven by opinion instead of science and data and doctors. That is not what I'm about.
The Premier was also asked why he didn't request researchers modelling the roadmap parameters take into account recent improvements in contact tracing. He says if you asked 100 academics, you'd probably get 100 different answers, and in the end he had to make a call saying it wasn't a theoretical debate or a controlled trial, this was life. In that contact tracing effort, Victoria has also stepped up its testing of wastewater to try to detect coronavirus fragments in the water, and that is now being done across 25 different locations, including metropolitan Melbourne and the southern regional areas.
This is an approach which has been tried before and has been successful in the surveillance of polio all around the world, and has enabled Australia to maintain a polio-free status. So, in fact, it's not a new approach. Its attraction is that you can screen a large number of people by taking a relatively small number of samples. So in our case, we are currently testing at about 25 locations, and that gives us somewhere around 70% of Victoria's population.
He says this testing includes 2 large treatment plants servicing some 4 million people. And so hopefully they will be able to soon come up with a rapid traceback system and put testing further up the line so they can flush out these cases where coronavirus might be lurking. And hopefully that means we can get out of these lockdowns faster.
There have been 9 new coronavirus infections in New South Wales. 1 is in hotel quarantine. The 8 others are linked to known sources. The state's contact tracing program has been recognised by the Prime Minister, who this week hailed it as the gold standard in tackling the virus. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says the test and trace system is one part of a wider strategy.
Whilst I'm looking forward to having others outside New South Wales come to see what we're doing here in New South Wales about contact tracing and the like, contact tracing is only part of the story in dealing with a pandemic. Contact tracing, and our public health officials are amongst the best in the world, but contact tracing only works if you have the support mechanisms around that through integrated approach of all government agencies, whether it's compliance, whether it's Service New South Wales, whether it's police. Unless you have a whole of government governance approach to managing the pandemic, the contact tracing isn't as effective, and I really want to make that point clear.
Queensland has recorded 8 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. 5 are linked to the outbreak at the Queensland Correctional Services Academy at Wacol. The other 3 cases are related to a second cluster at Ipswich Hospital. 2 of them are health workers and the third is one of their children. The child's school, St Edmund's College, is closed for cleaning and contact tracing. The principal says it will likely remain closed until next week. The Oxford University coronavirus vaccine trial has been put on hold to investigate a possible unexplained illness in one of the trials. The drug company AstraZeneca has given no details about the participant's illness, but in a statement says the move is a routine action to ensure the integrity of the trial. The vaccine produced an immune response in its first human trials, making it one of the leading candidates in the race to combat the virus. The Australian government has secured millions of doses of the Oxford vaccine for local manufacturing. An inquest has heard evidence that police made a litany of errors in recording allegations of earlier assaults against Sydney teenagers Jack and Jennifer Edwards by their father 18 months before he shot them dead. Ursula Malone